Okay, so today we are going to look at CSQ1 from your new tutorial price stability. Okay, so we're going to look at CSQ1 and 2, and I'm going to look at the higher order questions to help you to do a breakdown. So hopefully you'll then be able to better understand and address the questions as required lah. So that when I go through in class, you can at least have something worked out. All right. Okay, so let's look at our very first question. So first question, your question 1E, we're looking at a high order only. Okay, so that's why I'm going through the high order questions. So with reference to extract 3 and 4, using ASAD analysis, why interest rates in the Eurozone? Why it was cut in September 2014, but no such cut was expected in Singapore. All right, so you do your quick question analysis, you can then see that, okay, what you need to do, you need to explain why. Okay, using concept of your ADAS, why is it that in the Eurozone there was interest rate cuts, but in Singapore, no such cuts were actually undertaken? So if you look at the extract 3, extract 4, you can then understand better what the situation was back then. All right, that prompted the Eurozone to actually reduce their interest rates. All right, and then why in Singapore's context, why we don't reduce our interest rates? Okay, I think you should by now know that Singapore, all right, when we talk about monetary policy, the type of monetary policy we are talking about, at least in Singapore's context, is solely and purely your exchange rate policy, ERP. Short form, ERP. Exchange rate policy. All right, why is it that Singapore we cannot, or why is it that we don't actually reduce our interest rate? All right, I believe if you look through your lecture notes, you'll know why. Because firstly, Singapore is a price taker, all right, in the international market. Secondly, because of our openness and our small size of our economy lah. All right, so those are the reasons why in Singapore we actually don't undertake such interest rate cut. We don't adjust interest rate. That's one part of the answer. The other part is why is it we don't adjust interest rate? All right, is there a need for us to adjust or not? And if really there's a need, what kind of policy do we then use? Okay, so it's a very simple question here. So I think you can identify very clearly that the policy in question is your expansionary monetary policy. All right, which is your interest rate policy. And the question here is why is it in UK is adopted this expansionary monetary policy, but Singapore, we don't have such. Okay, so you need to look at the objective. All right, and you can see that in UK, they were suffering problems in the economy. They were facing deflation. So they had to try to increase consumer spending. So you need to explain how this policy works to increase AD and why in the Eurozone, okay, be it UK or some other country, why is it that in the Eurozone, your interest rates was actually reduced? All right, I think you should know it's primarily to increase C, primarily to increase I, so that your AD here can increase. Okay? All right, so that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer, you basically need to look at this part here. Why Singapore don't use? Why is it Singapore we do not use interest rate policy? I think I mentioned earlier because of our size, small, as well as our openness towards trade. We are interest rate takers, and also because of the trilemma issue. So that's why in Singapore, instead of using your interest rate policy, what we then use would be your interest rate policy. You then want to elaborate more about what this interest rate policy is and how this interest rate policy can help Singapore achieve the objective as what we want. Okay, so this is a very straightforward question. I hope you should be able to do this. Next, we look at question F. Okay, explain and evaluate one supply side policy that the Singapore government might choose in order to achieve a reduction in the core rate of inflation. So I think you understand that in the context that was given, core rate or inflation still positive. So down here, question here is what type of supply side policy? All right, and question here asks you to explain and evaluate one only. So this is a very straightforward question. So I think I mentioned to you when it comes to supply side policy, almost always you might want to use your training and upgrading. Training and upgrading courses. So getting students to train, it's not students, sorry. Getting your people to train and upgrade yourselves. Okay, so that you can firstly increase productivity. Hopefully this can help to lower your COP, your cost of production, and increase your SRAS. Right, and then the other thing is through training and upgrading, you can actually increase the quality of your labor, your workforce, and thereby increasing your productive capacity and your LRAS. Okay, so for this question, basically, you need to use your HEL approach. How policy work, how is it effective in achieving your goal, as well as the limitation. Okay, because this was taken from a H1 past year A-level question, and H1, or their in the old syllabus, their highest mark was actually 8 marks. So this is a very straightforward one, and they only ask you for one policy. So if you do get this at A level, I think you are almost you'll be very lucky if you actually get such a question. All right, that's all I can say. Okay, so I believe CSQ1 should be quite straightforward and hopefully quite easy for you to answer. So if you have questions, feel free to let me know. All right. Okay, so my next part here that I'm going to go through, all right, is your CSQ2 from price stability. So I'm merging these two videos into one video. All right, so that if you need, you can actually just look at this video and then you just scroll accordingly lah. Okay, so for this question here, uh, okay, case study 2 basically is all about negative inflation. All right, so if you look at this particular question, what they want us to actually look at is basically to assess whether negative inflation is undesirable to an economy. So if you listen in lecture, you remember that when we talk about negative inflation, we're talking about your GPL falling. All right, and GPL falling, whether is it desirable or undesirable, you need to look at your root cause, okay, your type of deflation or your negative inflation that you experience. So if it's due to a fall in AD, almost always it's deemed to be undesirable lah. Okay, however, if it's due to a increase in your SRAS, or increase in your whole AS curve, almost always it's actually something that is positive. So what you need to do to address this question, all right, explain what negative inflation is and what are the causes lah. So as I mentioned earlier, okay, AD decrease, AS increase. Okay, of course, this question is not just talking about the various causes because the question here is whether it is undesirable to an economy. So your thesis here, you want to form negative inflation is undesirable. Your thesis, sorry, not antithesis. Your thesis here is negative inflation is undesirable. Antithesis is your negative inflation is actually desirable. All right. So based on your extracts, you will then try to locate your answer. So if you look at for your thesis about how negative inflation is undesirable, you look at this extract 6, you can actually find a number of your answers. Okay, so I've before I talk about that, okay, when we talk about desirable, undesirable, I think you want to do it in a certain way, okay, such as this. You look at the macro objective on firms as well as on households. So from there, you can then segment the impacts and then address the question on whether is it desirable or undesirable by looking at its impact on, let's say, your macro objective, on the ability of the economy achieving its macro objective, impact on the firms, okay, in terms of profits, in terms of price, all right, as well as on the households. right? The standard of living, their income, their employment, things like that. Okay, and eventually form your own conclusion, whether it is undesirable or not. So if you look at extract 6, you can actually find a few points that help us to actually shares a bit of info about whether negative inflation is undesirable or not. So this part here, okay, it shares with us that when you have negative inflation, your consumers tend to put off consumption, and therefore this will lead to a fall in AD. Okay, and so this part here will have a fall in AD. So when you have fall in AD, I think quite naturally you know that this one will lead to fall in RNY, increased unemployment. So remember macro objectives. So this is how it can have the impact on macro objective. Okay, next we have if prices fall across an economy but wages do not, then your firm's margins will be squeezed. So down here is actually suggesting that the profits of firms likely to decrease because your cost here, okay, in terms of wages, assumed to be constant, right? But your prices are, which is part of your total revenue equal P times Q. If P fall, assume this one stays the same, your total revenue will fall. So therefore, at the end of the day, your profits, okay, because profit is total revenue minus total cost. If this one decrease because prices have fallen, but your cost stays the same, likelihood the profits of your firms will decrease. And what will happen here, you will see employment falling as well. All right, which can drive back to the earlier point. Another part here is about debts. Okay, I think as mentioned in lecture, when you have negative inflation or deflation, the purchasing power of your money actually increases. All right, so what happens here is that your debt, although the debt amount you owe is still nominally the same, but the real value has actually increased now. So when you pay back let's say you pay back $100, this $100 can actually buy more goods and services than when you actually borrow this $100 initially. Okay, so this could actually have impact on your consumer, your households lah. Alright, can also have impact on your firms as well because they might tend to borrow to invest. Alright, and I think you can see also there's a lot of these non-performing loans which could lead to devastating effects on your economy because if the banks cannot get back the loan, all right, and then your savers are those who put their money with the bank lend out the money that is being put with them for savings, right? You remember? So what eventually happened here is that if the banks cannot take back all these loans, all right, then your savers start to lose confidence and want their money back. The banks end up, okay, they have to go and look for this money to return to your savers. So that can create quite a crisis in the particular economy because it could even lead to what we call a bank run. Basically, the bank got no money lah. All right, you interested can go and Google and find out a bit more about this bank run thing. Okay. All right, not just all this Okay, you can also see when you have deflation. All right, when you have deflation, your real interest rates actually increase. Okay, why is that so? Basically, you write out your formula. Okay, so your formula is real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus inflation rate. Okay, so if you have negative, let's say 5% inflation, so prices are falling by 5%. So let's assume nominal interest rate here is 0, all right, to make it as minimal as possible. You will see your real interest rate Despite nominal interest rate being zero, real interest rate is actually positive 5%. All right, so this could create problems, okay, because interest rates, as you know, can affect cost of borrowing, and it can influence your C, it can influence your I. If real interest rate is so high, because unless you push this nominal interest rate down to negative region, otherwise when you have deflation, your real interest rate will be relatively high lah. And this will have effects on your C and I because C and I might actually fall if interest rates are too high. And this will have impact on your AD. Okay. So that's why I think you can see a number of European economies are using negative interest rates. So they bring this one down to negative so as to bring this, because no matter what, if you have deflation, this one will be a plus something. So unless you have negative here, all right, otherwise, if this is, let's say the lowest value, positive value will be zero, you will have quite a high real interest rate at the end of the day. Okay, so all these are mostly the negative effects of your negative inflation. All right, extract 6 will be telling you more about the negative effects of deflation, negative inflation rate. You look at extract 7, you can find in Singapore, extract 7 actually in Singapore's context. However, when we have negative inflation, those were actually positive. All right, it's not so undesirable because the negative inflation in Singapore's context was was due to fall in oil prices as well as transport costs. So under such situation, you see a fall in COP, AS curve actually, SRAS curve actually increase. So that type of negative inflation actually is desirable because that can also bring about actual economic growth. Right, so that should form some ammo for you to actually argue your antithesis here lah. Extract 6 is more of here. So your eventual stand, whether is it desirable or undesirable, please make your own stand. All right, so I hope this one you should be able to do. Now we look at the last question for CSQ2. With reference to data where appropriate, discuss whether government should use negative interest rate or another policy measure when you have this recession with deflation. So I hope you know what a recession is and what a deflation is, because there are two very different situations that we have. Recession, all right, in case you're not aware, basically your GDP is falling for at least 2 consecutive quarters or more. So negative growth rate, negative growth rate or falling GDP, 2 consecutive quarter, which is at least 6 months or more consecutively. That's what a recession is. Deflation, on the other hand, I think you know is a falling price level. So under such a situation, okay, your recession mostly due to fall in AD. Deflation also mostly due to fall in AD. So whether government should use negative interest rate or not. Okay, so you need to talk about negative interest rate, all right, and maybe another policy measure. Because down here, okay, if you identify the problem here is to the fall in AD, then really what you need to do is to increase the AD here. Okay, so negative interest rate, explain how this can actually help you to increase AD. And perhaps another policy. And this one should be a demand side policy. So perhaps you want to look at fiscal policy. All right, so basically introduction, you talk about what recession and deflation and talk about what are the causes. Okay, usually it's for an AD. So government should use negative interest rate. Talk about how negative interest rate can help to tackle recession with deflation. Use your HEL approach. Then talk about another policy. So another policy here can be fiscal. It could be also what we call QE, quantitative easing. All right. So do the HEL approach here as well. and then make a stand whether they should use negative inflation rate or not. Give reason and then justify. All right, so I hope you are able to do this because this is actually a straightforward exercise. So please get this done so that we can discuss this fruitfully in class. All right.